Like many of the video game heavyweights, THQ first began dabbling in the toy business. But what began in the mid-90s as toy headquarters eventually evolved into the publisher we now know today. While there have been many headlines surrounding financial problems and studio closures, it's worth noting some of the innovative and memorable games that THQ has created. THQ's first noteworthy success came at the turn of the century with their wildly popular wrestling games. Japanese studio Yuke's put a sleeper hold on the competition with these grappling sims, and they've been knocking out THQ's increasingly realistic and brutal wrestling titles for over a decade now.
He got right, oh my God! My God, the spear took the man all the way through the barricade.
Yuke's later went on to create THQ's even more heavy-hitting UFC franchise.
And he is a finisher.
Importantly, THQ used this wrestling revenue to buy up a string of studios. First up was Volition, who would go on to play a key part in some of THQ's core games. It was kind of like having an R&D team for their new IP. Red Faction arrived in 2001, a first-person shooter that was literally groundbreaking. Using innovative tech dubbed Geomod, gamers could use the weaponry to carve through walls and buildings. The tech was glitchy and felt ahead of its time, but it did make Red Faction one of the bravest and most memorable shooters of its day. The Aussie-made Destroy All Humans was another key part of THQ's innovative contribution. Instead of the usual Martian shooting gallery, this game cast you as the alien invader.
Attention, Earth creature. This planet is now part of the Furon Empire.
Terrorizing Earthlings with telekinesis, death rays, and your flying saucer, this was an open-world game with a difference. While we fondly remember some of these franchises, they were costly to develop. Wrestling games were one cash cow, but there was another highly profitable genre of games that THQ soon became synonymous with: kids games. With both Nickelodeon and Disney in its stable, THQ effectively had a license to print money, and that's exactly what it did. Over the coming years, it flooded the market with lightweight kids games.
I can't believe this is happening here.
It's horrible!
They weren't all terrible. Some of the Pixar games were good fun. Unfortunately though, most of them were like this.
She's right. Up close, they look totally fake.
These licenses kept the THQ gravy train powering along for years and allowed them to open up over a dozen studios. Relic was an important purchase for THQ as it earned them some much needed cred in the PC market.
He who stands with me shall be my brother.
The Homeworld Games had established Relic as one of the best RTS devs out there, so THQ put them to work on two successful new franchises: Warhammer 40k Dawn of War,
Onward to glory!
And the Thinking Gamers World War II title Company of Heroes. While it hasn't yet overshadowed the StarCraft juggernaut, Company of Heroes still stands as one of the most critically acclaimed RTSs of all time. THQ's next hit came from Red Faction creator Volition. Saints Row was a shameless knockoff of Grand Theft Auto, but it had the advantage of being the first one to hit the current consoles. Tight shooting mechanics and deep customization options lifted this out of cheap imitation territory and secured its own patch of gaming turf. Admittedly, that turf was home to themes that felt like they'd been scrawled on the wall of a high school toilet.
You want the police to bust your ass?
Next, Volition returned to Red Faction with the sequel Guerrilla. The ambitious yet flawed destruction of the original was finally realised. Now structures would groan and crumble realistically as you battered them about. This chaotic destruction made it one of the most enjoyable sandboxes in recent years. After Juiced and Stuntman stalled THQ's attempts to enter the driving genre, they had another hit with the homegrown game dabbled. The concept of breathing life into a drab world by painting it was brilliant. Clever cutscenes also punctuated the action. The original still stands out as a high watermark for both third-party Wii games and the Aussie development community. 2010 saw the arrival of Darksiders. You could argue it borrowed heavily from God of War and Zelda's playbook, but you couldn't deny its quality. THQ gave the studio an almost unheard of 4 years to develop the game, and its polish really shows. Hulking boss encounters and deep combat make it one of THQ's proudest achievements. The publisher's next franchise wasn't so lucky. THQ clearly sank a lot of money into Homefront in a bid to capture audience from the established big guns. It featured an alternate reality where a war-ravaged USA is occupied by a unified Korean army. The premise is intriguing, but it's lost beneath the drab visuals and generic combat. Homefront was a costly misfire, and it wasn't THQ's only problem. By 2011, the gravy train had derailed in a big way. The arrival of inexpensive mobile and social gaming had diminished console gaming's dominance, and charging big bucks for mediocre licensed games was no longer an easy business.
With all your favorite peeps.
The timing couldn't have been worse for THQ's big gamble, U-Draw. The idea was simple enough. Use this slab of plastic to draw pictures and play minigames like Pictionary. It's a lot like those drawing apps for tablets, except that instead of being a free app, it cost almost as much as a tablet, and it suffered from lag. Gamers ignored it in droves, leaving a stockpile of 1.4 million unsold copies. This white elephant cost THQ over $100 million. THQ's financial problems were becoming critical, causing them to close several studios in an attempt to return the company to profitability. Earlier this year, THQ's share price had slumped to less than $1, threatening them with a delisting from the stock exchange. Compare this against THQ's peak $30 share price in 2007, and you see how immense this financial fall has been. Studio closures weren't enough to save THQ, so to create a cash injection, they were forced to sell off 2 successful gaming licenses. The popular UFC franchise was sold to rival publisher EA. THQ also recently offloaded Devil's Third, the upcoming game from Ninja Gaiden creator Itagaki-san. These sell-offs, plus the splitting of THQ's stock, was enough to avoid them being delisted entirely, but there's no denying the precarious situation they now find themselves in. Still, there's light at the end of the tunnel for THQ. Naughty Dog co-founder Jason Rubin has signed on as THQ's new president, and the handful of games that have survived the cuts look promising. As they say, whatever doesn't kill you.